job.
Go.
Yeah.
I just posted it on the Facebook group. I don't know who the attendees are, but I think even one of them might be Gabrielle from Canada. And she's amazing. I wish there was more of her.
I could look her up, Kelly, if you give me her last name.
Hi, everyone. Jessica. Hi. Kelly, I'm so sorry I forgot to email you. I'm hoping you're still ready and willing to share your amazing experience in this area.
The exact same way I always do, with the motor running. It works.
Okay, amazing. And is that okay though if I turn to you at a point to share some of your experience in reaching out to your legislator and engaging in this kind of advocacy?
Sure,
amazing.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I forgot to email you.
No problem.
For your flexibility. Hi, Meg, and I see Rachel, who I think is a participant. Welcome, Rachel. Sorry to put you through some of that housekeeping. Hi, Connie.
Hey, Meg.
I'm just gonna
Hey,
my
I want to make sure I've got the latest run of show here.
okay, you got it. I'm gonna pull up my PowerPoint so we can just have that on the screen.
No, that's you.
I can send it to you. You want the full run of show?
I think you sent it to me. I just have to negotiate my screens to get, you know how that is.
Right.
Like, exit full screen, like all that stuff. But life is good.
Okay, so I think we're starting to see some of our participants. Everyone's timely, as tradeswomen always are. The most timely and efficient people I work with. It's true.
No, I know.
Get a job done, planned. It's amazing. Okay.
And then I wanted something else here. Okay, so.
Jessica, it's drilled into our brain that if you're on time, you're late. So we're always ahead of schedule.
I mean, I'm telling you, I love working with tradeswomen, former tradeswomen, because of that. Okay, hi everyone. I'm seeing lots of people joining. That's great.
Taking a cup of tea here, Jessica.
No problem. So we got hi everyone who's joined already. We're gonna wait until 2 o'clock Pacific to get started. So thanks for being here, and we'll start in a few minutes.
Jessica, we may want to remind people about being on mute when they're, just to make sure the extra noise is not.
Oh yeah.
And then
I got a whole housekeeping list to go through.
Okay. I'll leave it to your capable hands, because that's why I like working with you. You got this stuff in hand, girl. Speaking of going on mute, I'm going to go on mute.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm seeing more people join. That's amazing. We're just gonna wait a couple minutes before we get started. Hey. Okay. And while we wait for everyone, if you, while we're waiting for the rest of the attendees, if you could just put your name, pronouns, and any affiliation if you have one, trade, union, etc. Or if you are just here on behalf of yourself, just name and pronoun is great.
Jessica, you want us to put our names in the chat or on our picture?
In the chat, please. All right. We are right at 2 Pacific. We're going to give it 1 more minute and then we'll get started.
I'll be looking.
Great. And if you just arrived, if you could put your name, pronouns, and any affiliation that you might have, union, trade, organization, and we will get started in a moment.
Hi, Connie. Hi, everybody.
I think we're going to get started. It is 2:02 Pacific time. So I want to just start by saying a couple of housekeeping matters, which is one, if you didn't hear this request, if you could put your name, pronoun, and any affiliation that you have in the chat. That way we can get to know everyone who's in the room. Also, a reminder to please put yourselves on mute if you're not speaking so that we can reduce the background noise. And finally, the reason we did this training in this Zoom meeting format where everyone can see everyone is that we want it to be interactive and people can see each other and ask questions. So you don't have to have your camera on, but we welcome it if you want to. And if you have questions as we're going through the training, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll try to kind of address them as we go to make it more of an interactive situation. But we also have time saved at the end for questions at the end as well. And so you can wait till then to ask your questions. And then finally, just notice that we are recording this training. It will only be sent to other tradeswomen or tradeswomen advocates or allies who were not able to join but want to get the training so that they can participate in some of the legislative and other types of advocacy we're going to be talking about. So just know that we're being recorded, but that it's for that purpose, to share with other tradeswomen. So with that, those are the kind of housekeeping matters. I am going to turn it to Connie, but I guess I'll just introduce myself. I'm Jessica Stender, and I'm an attorney at Equal Rights Advocates. We're a gender justice organization based in San Francisco, but we represent different people, but we represent workers who experience discrimination in the workplace, as well as students who have experienced discrimination, including sexual harassment and assault at school. And so we've been very proud in our over 45 years of history to be able to represent tradeswomen who are seeking access to the trades, but also who have experienced discrimination in their jobs. And so that's how we come at this. And very excited to be here today. So I'm going to turn it over now to Connie to get us started.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. So glad to have you all here and so glad to see so many familiar faces and meet new people. Thanks for joining us. And thank you, huge thank you to Jessica and Monica from Equal Rights Advocates for putting on this training. Much appreciation for all the other presenters as well. My name is Connie Ashbrook, and I am the co-chair of the National Task Force on Tradeswomen's Issues with Leah Rambo from SMART, my co-chair who wasn't able to join us today. And I am retired from being executive director of Oregon Tradeswomen. And like I said, really grateful to see some pre-apprenticeship graduates from Oregon Tradeswomen on here today. And also I worked as an elevator constructor for many years, having worked in the trades 17 years altogether before I went to work for Oregon Tradeswomen. So I'm really thrilled to be co-chair of the task force. I think this is a very important organization that has done some amazing work and is doing even more amazing work. We're a national coalition of tradeswomen, allies, and advocates addressing the lack of access, opportunity, and equity in the construction industry and other non-traditional occupations. We promote a federal public policy platform and advocacy initiatives, which include efforts at the national level to improve, enforce, fund, and promote best practices in apprenticeship, in training, workforce development, career tech, non-traditional employment, and job site equity, all to benefit women in the trades. We also really work to showcase local issues and efforts and spread those best practices around the country and to even internationally to our Canadian sisters and others through various venues. We have and can make a difference with our united voice. For instance, Oregon has 3 times the number of female apprentices, 9.8% in the unionized trades, and 6.7% statewide, as is the national average, thanks to the work of Oregon tradeswomen. I'm proud that so many Oregon tradeswomen pre-apprenticeship grads have gone on to become leaders in industry, their unions, and apprenticeship programs, and we have some of them joining us here today. The task force has had a number of policy wins over the years, including increased funding for WANTO, which funds pre-apprenticeship programs and which you'll hear more about later. We helped create stronger equal opportunity measures in 29.30, the apprenticeship rule on equal opportunity, and more recently submitted hundreds of comments against IRAPs, a watered down anti-worker form of apprenticeship that has now been canceled by the Biden administration. If you're interested in joining the task force, please put your name, address, and the word join in the chat. If you're already on the listserv, you don't need to do that, but anybody who's new, please do that if you'd like to join. A little bit about who's attending our trainings today and Thursday. And by the way, there's still time to sign up for Thursday's training. And as Jessica said, a recorded version will be available. The operating engineers has the most attending at 9, followed by 8 each from carpenters, plumber, pipe fitters, and sheet metal. We also have IUPAT painters, laborers, insulators, ironworkers, electricians, and elevator constructors. And we have 13 folks representing our allies and advocates from various organizations. 20 states and DC are represented. We have 17 attendees from Illinois. Hey, great job, CWIT. And 10 from Oregon. Great job, Oregon tradeswomen. Again, welcome. We hope you learn and most importantly, use your voice for change. We will be following up with you afterwards to help you do this. Jessica, yes, we're going to see the slide of the volunteer leaders and co-chairs of the task force, which is 2 slides from here. The task force is an all-volunteer organization. We can only get done what our member volunteers do. And so we hope that you will join us in taking action after this training to help move our agenda to support tradeswomen on the job and at home. And here is our steering committee, myself, Leah Rambo, Jessica Stender and Meg Vasey from the policy committee, Rudy Mulligan and Cindy Frank from the action committee, Danae Poliot and Ali Perez from the communication committee. So thank you very much for joining us and turn it back over to Jessica.
Great, thank you, Connie. And welcome, there's a few new beeps I've heard. So welcome to the new people. Okay, so we are actually just gonna fix the slideshow so that it's bigger in one moment, but we'll get started now. So I'm gonna just go over the agenda for the day. And in a moment, this will be, I think, slightly bigger for everyone. But we're gonna first just talk about the importance of tradeswomen voices in these conversations. So we'll be talking today about what is legislative advocacy? What is lobbying? What does that even mean to try to influence and help pass good legislation or legislation with certain provisions in it? And the importance of having tradeswomen be part of those conversations for legislators to hear. Next, we're going to talk about kind of a quick overview of the legislative process and where we are fitting into that as tradeswomen and tradeswomen advocates. We're going to talk then about kind of lobbying 101 and what we mean by lobbying and how we lobby. And this training is meant for everyone. Anyone who has, even if you've never engaged at all in lobbying, if you've never been involved in advocating for legislation, or if you've had a lot of experience or some experience. So we're making it kind of accessible to everyone. And I want to just kind of on that note say, we will be going into some detail about the bills that will be addressed in our lobby visits, but people are not expected to be experts in those bills or even necessarily know much about them at all. So we're providing the detail about them so that you're aware of them, but you will not be expected to know all of the details. And in fact, the most critical kind of contribution that tradeswomen can make in these lobby visits is sharing their own personal stories. So we're going to talk about that, as I mentioned. So then we will go into an overview of the priority legislation that we'll be covering in the bills, in the visits. And then we will talk about some other types of engagement that you can do. So if you're not able to join a lobby visit, a meeting with a legislator or staffer because of your work schedule, or you just don't want to be in one, we're going to talk about other ways that you can support policies to help tradeswomen. And I think what we're going to do, I'm going to actually share it. So yeah, Monica, you can stop sharing and I'll just share since it'll be easier to see. So let me pull up my screen and we will dive right in. And while I am pulling it up, the question about the PowerPoint, yes, we will be sharing the PowerPoint itself, as well as follow-up materials about the legislation that we're covering. And again, no one is going to be expected to be an expert in the legislation, but we will send it so that you can have that background information as we go into the visit. So I'm going to bring us to the current slide. And let me make sure, is everyone seeing now the full, can I get a thumbs up, the full slide? I only see Connie and Esther. I got a fist in the air. Even better. Amazing. My favorite trainings to do are with tradeswomen, tradeswomen allies. Okay, so we're going to go in now to the meat of the presentation, and I'm going to turn it to my colleague, Monica Demersky, who's amazing, to talk about why we lobby in the first place and why we are going to engage in these lobby visits, i.e. meetings with either legislators or their staff about certain pieces of legislation. So I'll turn it to Monica.
Thanks, Jessica. Hi, everyone. My name is Monica. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the policy fellow at Equal Rights Advocate, so I work with Jessica on all of our policy work. So before we get into some more of the more like policy, substantive stuff, we want to just kind of do a basic, what is lobbying and why is it important? So when we talk about lobbying, we really just mean contacting your legislators. They can be emails, phone calls, letters. We'll talk about other engagement strategies later, but really just contacting them and letting them know why an issue is important to you and how they should vote on that issue. Lobby visits are super important because they put a face to that issue. So they're in the Capitol, they're in DC, they're not really talking to their constituents all the time. So hearing from you, getting that direct impact, that direct experience is really valuable and really does help influence how they're going to vote on certain issues. They don't necessarily know why those issues are important. So you coming to them and hearing from a lot of constituents, hearing from all these tradeswomen are really going to demonstrate that people care enough to take action and they should also take action. So if there already are allies in the legislature, this can help provide a backstory. They can go back to their own colleagues in the Capitol and say, you know, we heard from these tradeswomen, this is really important, this is how we should vote on this issue. And if they're undecided, your story really does help influence their decision and how they're going to vote. So really, really valuable. I just want to underscore that. Like, they do work for us. I think we forget that, you know, they're up there, they're in DC, they seem really far away, but at the end of the day, we did elect them to hear our voices and to represent us. So just remember that your story is really powerful.
Thank you, Monica. And I'll just one quick follow-up before I get into what to expect. As someone who engages with legislators and legislative staff a lot, see how much more impactful it is when I am accompanied by a person who is directly impacted by the legislation. So although I'm a tradeswomen advocate and ally, I am not a tradeswoman myself. And hearing from people who are actually working with the tools or have worked with the tools, people who have experienced being in a pre-apprenticeship program or apprenticeship program and how that has influenced their life is really a way to put a face on these issues that the legislators and their staff just don't get from someone like us, who's very, very emphatically explaining why a certain bill is important or a certain provision is important, but to hear from the people affected really is what makes a difference. So thanks, Monica, for highlighting that. So next, we're going to go into what to expect in a lobby visit. And again, these are the visits that we will be planning in July, and we'll be reaching out to you all about your availability to participate in them. And if you're not able to, we'll talk about other ways to engage. But for those who would like to participate in them, and we hope many of you will, what it's going to really look like the day of. So essentially, when you are in a lobby visit with a legislator or their staffer, we will have predetermined the lobby teams. So you will be on a team of people, including other tradeswomen or other tradeswomen advocates and allies. There will be a team lead. So someone, and I'm going to remind everyone to just mute yourself if you can, if you're not speaking, just to reduce background noise. So there will be a team lead, and you'll have all this information before your meeting, so you'll know everyone's roles. And that team lead will be the person who kind of starts off the meeting, thanks the legislator or their staffer for taking the meeting, gives a quick introduction of who the Tradeswomen Taskforce is and what we are about. And then that team lead will kind of facilitate introductions so that everyone who's in the meeting can then introduce themselves, name, pronouns, and if you feel comfortable, your affiliation, either your specific union if you want to provide it, the trade that you work in, or again, you can just be there on your own behalf. This is me and this is who I am. Next, the team lead will kind of facilitate each person in the team speaking and presenting their talking points. And again, you will already know what your talking points are beforehand, and you will be given talking points based on what you want to cover. So some people will be specifically talking about a piece of legislation. And again, we'll be turning to that later in the training about what bills we'll be addressing. But some people will have talking points on a specific bill. You know, we strongly support the National Apprenticeship Act. We really like these provisions. They are very important, but we also think that these provisions should be added. So specific people will already have those talking points given to them. And then other people will have the assigned role, and multiple people, hopefully, of sharing a personal story. So as I mentioned, you don't need to cover any specifics on the bills if you don't want to. And being able to share your story about how a pre-apprenticeship or apprenticeship program helped you, or how being in a program funded by WANTO helped you, other stories that are relevant to the bills, that will be very important, and you will already have that role assigned to you to talk about why the bills matter. And as you've heard us say now repeatedly, the personal stories really do matter. And I hear that all the time from legislators and staff, that is what helps sometimes make or break their decision here. And then finally, at the end, the team lead will ask the staffer or the legislator if we can count on either their yes vote or their agreement to take back a request to their committee, or whatever the specific ask is that we've made of them. We will ask them, what do you think? I will say you don't always get a clear answer. Usually it is well, I need to talk to my boss if it's a staffer, or I need to talk with my colleagues if it's a legislator, but you at least will get some kind of answer. You know, I've appreciated hearing from you all today, and I will take it back to them. Especially if there's any questions, that's another, thing that we'll note down in these visits, any questions or requests for follow-up information. And then at the end, the team lead will ask if we can take a photo. Since these will be virtual via Zoom, it will be a screenshot. So everyone will get their game faces on, and the team lead will take a screenshot if the staffer or legislator is okay with that. And we will later post those on social media with the consent of everyone who's in the meeting. And then we will thank them. So in these visits, those are kind of the way that they'll go. I'm just gonna take a minute, because as I said, if you have questions as we're presenting, you can put them in the chat. We'll kind of get to them as we go through this presentation, but you can also save them till the end. Okay, so I don't see any questions yet. Great. One other issue that role that we'll have in these meetings is someone will be a note taker, not the team lead. And that note taker doesn't need to take kind of exhaustive notes, but rather just any high level takeaways that are important to know, especially, for instance, if we get some kind of position from the legislator or staffer. Yes, I am good on this, or yes, we're going to vote for that, or yes, we will bring that request back to the committee to see if we can add that amendment. Whatever the request, whatever information we get from that staff or legislator, we'll want to write that down. Any questions that they have that we need to answer later. As you see on this slide, no one needs to feel that that they're a technical expert or that you have to answer all the questions. So if no one in the meeting knows the answer, that's totally fine. I've done it many a time. You say, we will get back to you on that question after this meeting. So writing down any of those questions is important, and any other follow-up that's needed. Okay. Yes, and Monica mentioned they love seeing our pictures with us on social media. So that's a good one to do, those photos. So the day of, we kind of already mentioned a lot of this, but you'll know your team. You know who your team lead is. It'll be sent to you via email. You'll have the Zoom information of how to join the meeting, and you'll know the time. These will mostly be with people in DC, so it'll be East Coast time. So we'll work with your schedule to figure out when and if you can participate. There may be some in-district visits though, so with staff in the district where the legislator is from. And we'll especially try to assign you to those visits with your own legislators, because they particularly like to hear from their constituents. So you'll be hopefully in some with your own legislator. So all of that information will be sent to you. And then finally, we'll be doing some social media amplification during these visits. So we'll be posting those photos, as I mentioned, and saying Tradeswomen Advocacy days are happening. The National Taskforce on Tradeswomen Issues was proud to meet with Congresswoman X about X issue and proud to have her support, etc. So the day of, we'll show you how you can kind of amplify those messages on social media with our hashtags. Okay, so before we get into kind of the meat of the training, which is the bills that we're going to be talking about in these visits, and also supporting in other ways. So even if you can't do a visit, We'd love your support in other ways, which we'll talk about. We wanted to just give a bit of the context that we'll be briefly touching on in these meetings, which is just that something that we've now all, I think, heard a lot about and sometimes read about, which is that that COVID had an impact, a disproportionate impact on women. Women who are already struggling to achieve economic security due to their disproportionate numbers in minimum wage and low wage jobs. Another reason we want to emphasize that it's so important for women to be have access to higher paid jobs in the trades. So women are already struggling, and then COVID hits and has this disproportionately harmful impact on women. So 2020 saw the lowest level of female participation in the labor force since the 80s. And a lot of this was a disproportionate impact on women of color and low-income women. So we see these kind of really horrifying stats that more than 11 million women have lost their jobs, and another 2.65 million have left the workforce since 2020, since February of 2020. So these stats really show us how dire the situation is and how important it is to push for women into higher paid jobs. And here we have this stat, and I think we actually have an updated stat that we'll provide. So we'll give that to you before the lobby visit, which is that only 7% of all apprentices in 2013 were women. And we'll give an updated stat on that for you. So that's just a little bit more of the kind of background and context of why we are advocating for these laws and why we are pushing for them to have even more provisions to ensure equity. So before we get into the meat of the bills that we're going to be talking about, I'm going to turn it over to Meg, who is the co-chair along with me of the policy committee of the task force. And Meg's going to do a high-level overview of our infrastructure equity framework, which kind of buttresses all of the work that we're doing on these bills.
Good afternoon, everyone, and hello. Can you hear me? Yeah? Excellent. Like
Yes.
that. Thanks. And it's an honor to be here today, both with the Tradeswomen Taskforce leadership and as well as the tradeswomen community that is, comes so strong with us on these issues. And although we're small, we are mighty. And I really appreciate all of you participating here today. So we're going to go into a little bit more detail on this equity framework and some other slides, but I want to give you the high level and a little bit of why it's important. There's a lot of money on the table, and infrastructure, we mean heavy and highway, some construction building that's funded with federal funds. And we have asked that certain principles get embedded in this funding so that we know that women will participate and benefit from the workforce and the paychecks that go along with this infrastructure funding. So I'm going to just say that we want goals for women with numeric participation. We want transparency on the reporting, real-time reporting about how much diversity and gender equity there is on these projects. We want a respectful workplace and work sites. We want monitoring of compliance. So when people are not meeting their goals and not being inclusive and for diversity, both gender and equity, that we have someone that holds them accountable, that we have notification, that everyone is on notice for what is expected of them, that the agencies that let the projects, that would be the public agencies like the Department of Transportation, Department of Energy, et cetera, are involved and help us enforce the compliance on these projects. And we also are working to have supportive services funded in part through the infrastructure bills. There's massive amounts of dollars on the table. We're asking for 0.5% be targeted for supportive services like childcare, tools, other things that help women and others who need support get into the trades and get into these jobs. And then we know that there needs to be technical assistance provided for contractors, unions, and public agencies to make sure that we increase their participation on these projects. And with that, I'll hand it back to.
Great. Thanks, Meg. That was a very efficient presentation. Perfect. We talked a lot about keeping this efficient, everyone. So yeah, so that is our kind of Tradeswomen Taskforce equity framework that was developed in conjunction with the policy committee and members of the task force that kind of provides the basic principles of equity that we as a task force advocate for. And now we're going to turn to a more in-depth discussion about the 3 pieces of legislation that we'll be talking about in these lobby visits. Just as a FYI, depending on who we're meeting with, we may only cover 1 or 2 or 3 of these. It kind of depends on what is happening at the federal level. And that's another kind of caveat to all of this is that everything is moving very quickly, as I'm sure people are reading about in the news with regard to infrastructure and these bills. So we're going to kind of provide the background information about what the bills are and what we as a task force are asking for them to include to ensure better equity for women. The specific asks in these meetings may change slightly because things are moving so quickly, but this will at least provide the kind of background on the bills and foundation of what we want, such that then once we get in these meetings, we can add some additional requests or talking points, pivot slightly as we need to because of the changes that we're seeing. So I am going to now turn it over to Lauren. Actually, no, first I'm going first. So I'm going to turn it, Lauren and I, so Lauren from CWIT is going to help present with me on these bills. And I'm going to start with WANTO. So WANTO, I know many of you are very familiar with WANTO, but just as a bit of a background on what WANTO is, if it is newer to anyone, it's a grant program that assists both employers and labor management organizations in the placement, but also retention of women in apprenticeships and non-traditional occupations. So as I know, I don't need to explain to any of you, a big goal is to get more women into apprenticeship so that they can get into these higher paid, very male dominated occupations and provide, which as I know, we all know, provide a pathway out of poverty to many people. So in 2020, the WANTO grant program awarded over $4 million to 6 community-based organizations to increase women's employment in apprenticeship programs and in non-traditional occupations. And we just listed here some of the things that organizations that receive WANTO funding do. So they develop pre-apprenticeship or non-traditional skills training programs so that women are ready and prepared for these careers. They provide orientations for not only employers, but also unions and also workers to create the correct and better environments for women to be able to succeed in these careers. And again, we know they're incredibly male dominated, so women face specific kind of obstacles and barriers that men don't often face. And then they can use those funds for setting up support groups to facilitate networks and kind of support services for women to try to increase and improve in their retention. So I actually want to turn it to Lauren to provide a couple, kind of some specific examples of this that provide some additional context.
Hi, everybody, and thanks to the task force, the policy committee, and the task force leadership for setting this up. And I'm so happy to see so many of you on this call and so many of my colleagues in our program in Chicago, Philadelphia, the work we've been doing across the country. It's nice to see many of you here. First, I want to just say that WANTO is an example of tradeswomen's advocacy in action. WANTO was created because of the work of Chicago Women in Trades back in 1989 and 90, which was picked up the examples of the successes we were having on developing workforce equity on specific federally funded projects was noticed by a group in Washington called Wider Opportunities for Women, who brought it to the attention of Connie Morella, a Republican congresswoman from Maryland. And we really helped to craft that legislation back then, and it was enacted under President Bush in 1992. So I wanted to share that we can really make a difference. I also want to just say that WANTO has $4 million over the last 2 years. Just compare this to Youth Build, which has $89 million annually. So you can see we're you'll see it in the other requests we have for legislation, we really want that number to be amplified significantly. Want to, as Jessica mentioned, has helped pre-apprenticeship programs. And I just want to say we're launching a pre-apprenticeship program right now in Philadelphia. We have 15 budding applicants and a robust tradeswomen's committee. Shout out to Tanya on this call for helping to recruit, and they will be also working to mentor those women. Want to is funding that. We have our tradeswomen colleagues from Ohio, Jill and Chrissy. I'm glad to see you here, who are also getting support from Want To through Chicago Women in Trades grant. And it's helping to set up their Ohio Women in the Trades, as well as a childcare initiative to try to set up a pilot model for bringing childcare to tradeswomen that suits their hours. If you've been part of a mentoring program, you've benefited probably from Want To grants in some way or another. The Women's Committee of DC 14, our painters here in Chicago, have a really robust women's committee, and I'm happy to see Anne and Tracy on the call with us. I don't know if Helen has also joined, but we've been able to help facilitate the committee, which has done some remarkable things to get women hired where you need a letter of intent to be hired in the trades. So there's a lot of different very specific examples we can point to. I'm not going to go through many more, but I think you can recognize the benefits are extensive, but they need to be taken to scale. And that's what we want to do here, is help us lobby and advocate for ways to replicate Want To.
Thank you, Lauren. And we welcome, we're going to talk a little bit more about personal experiences. So as we're talking through these bills, Want To, and then the other bills, you can start reflecting on how your experiences might relate to them. But thanks for those examples, Lauren. So specifically with regard to Want To, in these meetings, we're going to kind of, it's not super complicated. The other bills have a little bit more nuance in terms of what we're requesting. But we want to make it clear that given the kind of broader context of women's economic security, which has always been dire, but has really been kind of brought to a whole new level because of COVID, it's more important now than ever that women in the workforce have to be supported. And as we've been talking about, and as many of you know firsthand, Want To is critical to ensuring that women can enter and stay in these jobs. And therefore critical to addressing these really disproportionate impacts we've seen of COVID on women workers. Having been lobbying on a lot of different bills recently, I definitely see that legislators want to hear that post-COVID, these bills are necessary. And so this is a big point, is that emerging from COVID, we need to ensure women are getting into these higher paid jobs and have the support they need. And we know that women are often the or primary breadwinners in their families. So helping women advance their economic security and increase their economic security is not only important for them, but also for their families that they support and for the broader communities they live in. And finally, we get to this very big price tag that we are requesting of $100 million, which we know will seem very high in these meetings, but we want to assert how important we think this funding is and how much we think should be allocated to it. And so that is the number that we are going to be requesting in these meetings. I saw another fist in the air from Esther. Thank you. Yes. I just want to make sure if anyone, Connie, Meg, Lauren, anyone wants to just add anything on about that ask or anything else on Want To before we move on.
I think it's really relevant if you say something like Youth Build gets $89 million a year. What about the women? You know, we're 53% of the workforce.
Right.
And we know youth need to be introduced to the world of work, but their mothers and their sisters and their grandmothers need to have access to that workforce. So at this moment to support those youth.
Thanks, Lauren. And we will add that to the talking points. That's a really great comparative because it sounds like a lot, and then you compare it to other funder, entities that are funded, and it's not as much. So thank you. Okay,
I have a question.
Move on. Yes.
Hi, my name is Tracy Johnson from the Painters Union, Local 273, District Council 14. So we're asking or requesting $100 million to create women organizations, pre-apprenticeships, etc. But what about retaining or getting the jobs, or just women working? Because we can get the job, but if we're only working 3 months or 4 months out of the year, what good does that $100 million do if most of these employers are men and they don't want to hire women?
Tracy, really good question. And I think one of the things that we did with the Want To funding was support your committee to meet with the contractors and to ensure that they were doing a better job of not only hiring women, but keeping women working. But you'll also see that we don't want them to just do voluntary measures. We want goals and commitments, not just to bringing women into the field, but also hiring them and ensuring that they have good training opportunities on longevity in their careers so that they can become seasoned tradeswomen. So Want To, while it funds mentorship programs, women's committees, it funds technical assistance and training, we are also using it to promote goals on big economic projects that have significant economic development in an area. So for example, in Chicago, we're using it with the Obama Presidential Center and trying to make sure that that very large project has strong goals, or with our transit authority or the expansion of our airport. So it does have enough flexibility in it that we can do some of that kind of advocacy along with direct service programming.
Thank you, Lauren. And
Thank
thank you
you
for that question. Thank you for that question, Tracy. Okay, we are going to move on to the next piece of legislation that we'll be covering in these meetings. As I mentioned, the two bills that we're going to be talking about, the first one is the National Apprenticeship Act, and the next one is the Invest in America Act, and they are pretty meaty. So I just want to remind everyone that we will be sending out follow-up information about these specific pieces of legislation, the talking points that we're going to cover, and as well as the reminder that not everyone needs to cover specific pieces of legislation. We'll be having a lot of people sharing stories, but we want to make sure that everyone has a baseline understanding of what we're asking for. So I'm going to turn it now to Lauren to talk about the National Apprenticeship Act.
So let me just preface this by saying that this is a really critical moment. So not only are we coming out of a pandemic and seeing that women have lost most of the jobs, but women don't want to go back to those shitty jobs. They don't want jobs where they can't get a guaranteed salary, regular hours. And so I think there's a moment where it's even greater appeal to think about non-traditional and construction careers for women. So Chicago Women in Trades has an abundance of applicants right now. So we're really seeing the effect of that. We also have an administration that is prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're doing this in a very public way and a very specific way. We have a Congress that really wants to act in very friendly congressional supporters. And most importantly, we have you all who are learning how to be good advocates, who already are good advocates, and have the opportunity to have your voices heard. And I think the other thing that I think we have right now is really good recommendations that are very specific and targeted. So while we're not asking you to be wizards on all of that, we are lucky to have some legal and legislative wizards. So Jessica and Monica among them, and our colleague at Chicago Women in Trades, Donna Lenhoff. And we really share the ideas as tradeswomen about what works, and they help us translate it into the legal or legislative language. But we always want to keep refining it. And Chicago Women in Trades Policy Committee does a lot of that work. So I hope that you may see that as a role you can play within the task force if you're not already involved at a local level. So National Apprenticeship Act. The Apprenticeship Act that governs apprenticeship right now was introduced in 1937, passed in 1937, never updated, and only recently updated their equal employment opportunity regulations, which were introduced in 1978. We got many of the things, as Connie said, that we wanted, not everything. But now there's increased attention on apprenticeship. An effort started under Obama to expand the apprenticeship system. They think think it works. They think more people need to have access to it, and they think that more industries should adopt it. The primary goal, though, is to expand apprenticeship to other occupations. When we heard that, we said, okay, fine, but also make sure that you're expanding it to groups that have been underrepresented in the apprenticeship programs that have the largest share of the pot, and that's construction apprenticeships. So if they are the model, they need to be the model in diversity, equity, and inclusion as well. So this new act really emphasizes the role of apprenticeship and invests $3.5 billion over 5 years. There's never been such a significant investment. And just like we're saying, you know, you need to increase diversity, we also want to say that of that 3.5 billion over 5 years, a significant portion has to be addressed to increasing equity and inclusion. Next slide. So the legislation is good on many levels, but we noticed that there were a number of things that were missing in the new legislation. We're happy that it does include some non-discrimination and affirmative action measures. And I think, you know, when I got into the trades in 1979, I got in because of affirmative action regulations. Most of us still benefit from affirmative action regulations to get hired. Back then, affirmative action was much more strongly enforced. So this is something we want to not just see, we want to see it in this bill, and we want to see it amplified. There is also language here that says money needs to go to those people who are preparing to be apprentices or youth who need supportive services. And we like this model that some direct aid can go to help people, as Jessica said earlier, it might be for childcare, it might be for boots, it might be for application fees. So it can be a range of things that supports. We are also really glad to see that it creates a pre-apprenticeship program, and one that helps to make a systemic approach to pre-apprenticeship, because I think we've seen over the years that there are many different varieties of pre-apprenticeship. So this would put in place some guidelines for that. Next. So we got a couple concerns about this bill. And as I said, the equal employment opportunity and affirmative action requirements are stronger in the existing bill. So we want not only everything that's in, that's already exists to regulate EEO and apprenticeship to be added to this bill, but we want to even look back at the recommendations we made when the updated EEO regs were introduced in 2016 and say, go further, you know, and by going further, it means things like not just need to do anti-harassment training, but you need to do intensive, in-person, interactive anti-harassment training. And intensive means not a 30-minute, you know, course that somebody signs off on, but something where people get to have a chance to have real in-depth conversations and learning about that. So, when we ask you to talk about this, we might ask you to talk about what it means to have gone through your apprenticeship program. What did it mean to experience your apprenticeship program as one of either your gender or your race or your nationality? What did that feel like? But we also want to say that most of us, as I said, got in because of these regulations. We point to the example of leadership like Leah Rambo, who's the co-chair of the task force and is the director of the apprenticeship program for SMART, the Sheet Metals Local 28, who has made the numbers in the sheet metal program rise from less than 3% to as high as 17%. And that's because not only is she a great leader and committed to diversity and knows what to do, but also because her local was under a consent decree for reasons of discrimination. So that's another way of saying consent decree is goals. They had to do a better job. The court told them to. We don't want courts to have to intervene. That takes a long time. We want the legislation and the regulations to be there to do this. So next slide. The bill should also include very specific outreach, recruitment, and retention activities. And Tracy, as you said, retention is completely related to can you work? And can you work is related to did you get good training? So we have a lot of recommendations about making sure that tradeswomen, female apprentices are not assigned to menial assignments month after month after month and get to the point of their third or fourth year as an apprentice and don't feel they can journey out because they don't know enough. So we want there to be very specific recommendations about that. We know that if you don't set goals, create a blueprint, a strategic plan, right? We know what it means to build something. You have to have a blueprint. You have to go back and see, are you following the blueprint? Are the specs there? We want affirmative action apprenticeship programs to do the same kind of review for their affirmative action and EEO policies and practices and outcomes. So it's not just enough to say, well, we tried, or our best efforts, or we did, good faith, which is often what we hear, or we couldn't find any, or they didn't come. We want real outcomes, and we want people to know what their baseline is and what their goals and achievements are annually. Next slide. So I mentioned anti-harassment, and these definitely need to be stronger. We know that sexual harassment continues to be a huge problem. The Me Too movement was no surprise to tradeswomen. Me Too was on a daily basis for many of us, but we also know that the level of racial and religious harassment is increasing in this country daily in outrageous ways. And we really need to ramp up the training to make sure that we can create respectful workplaces where everybody feels they're dignified and or treated with dignity and respect and has the ability to be successful. So this
155 fucking hours on it. Right, bro.
I got it 1.5, like 8 hours on.
All right, and we'll just do a quick reminder for to mute if you're not
It's broke off.
speaking.
So I think is that Chrissy? She's out. I thought I recognized her voice. Anyhow, so training like this doesn't happen in 30 minutes. It does happen if you take the time. 3 to 4 hours we think is the minimum to conduct really good anti-harassment training. And guess what? You have to do refresher courses. You have to continue to learn and build not just your ability to treat everybody with fairness and respect, but be culturally competent in the workplace so that everybody feels they're welcome and included. So we've got some really good models. We know from our experience delivering this kind of anti-harassment training that often apprenticeship programs, unions, and contractors are somewhat hungry for it. When I deliver it, they say, I've never heard this before. I never thought about it this way. All we've ever had was a lawyer shake their fist at us. And all respect to the lawyers here, but that doesn't work. So we want something that goes deeper. Next slide. So in order to do all these activities that we want, we have to have a certain amount of funding for it. And so we want to make sure there are set asides, and that means a portion of the money that is overall being spent go towards activities for pre-apprenticeship, and that of the 50% of all of the monies should go for programs that address non-traditional apprenticeship populations. And 40% of that should be for pre-apprenticeship programming. We also want to make sure that they fund what we call technical assistance. And this may be providing guidance to a union or apprenticeship program on developing their affirmative action policy, or writing their anti-harassment policy, or developing their strategic recruitment plan, or helping to set up a women's committee in the union. So all of this could be funded out of this bill with a certain amount of money set aside to do that, and provisions that organizations like ours across the country can deliver that kind of technical assistance. We know it works. We've seen a difference. As Connie said, in Oregon, we know it makes a difference. We've seen rising numbers in Massachusetts. And we know that also the rising numbers of women, tradeswomen who are organized, who get to go to the Tradeswomen's Conference. And I didn't mention that, but when I talked about Want To funding, but it was Want To funding that also really helped to spur the conference and spur the organizing of NAB2 to develop a tradeswomen's committee and a resolution that would said we need to have a national tradeswomen's conference. And think about how many amazing things have come out of that conference or those conferences. So, and the National Apprenticeship Act could fund conferences for tradeswomen. That could be seen as a support activity. Am I coming to the end of the National Apprenticeship Act? Yes. So I could take questions, or should I, Jessica, or wait?
Yeah, why don't we move on just to make sure we get through everything? That was great. So we'll move on to the final bill that we're going to talk about, which is the Invest in America Act, and we'll just save the questions for the end. So I'll just move on to the next slide for you, Lauren. Great.
So, so the Invest in America Act, you probably hear infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure. And for years, you've heard about transportation and infrastructure funding. The committee is called T&I, Transportation and Infrastructure, in Congress. And you probably also hear jobs, jobs, jobs. This is a jobs, jobs, jobs bill. So it is a 5-year bill. We're looking at several ways that infrastructure may be funded, but this is likely to be funded at this level just for transportation and infrastructure at $500 billion. So wrap your finger around that, but also think about how much a project you may have worked on costs, okay? And how much of that cost is actually going for labor. So you can see it sounds like a very large number. When you divide it by the number of states, it's a 10, if my math is right, it's a $10 billion investment for each state. It gets reauthorized every 5 years, has different names. They will not let this funding lapse, I can assure you. When the recession came in 2008, or when government shut down back when they couldn't get compromise, funding for road builders never stopped. Those road builders are the best lobbyists and advocates you can imagine. So we have to just learn to be as good as they are. They never get the money, let the money stop flowing. It fixes roads and bridges, transit, SEPTA. Tanya will probably get some money. We're using money here in CTA for expansion of lines, renovations of lines. SEPTA is the Philadelphia Transit Association. So, and rail, Amtrak, and you know there is so much crumbling infrastructure. I think, you know, there's been in the news a lot of that. Next slide. So, when they say jobs, 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 they tend to mean, and we know those jobs primarily will go to men in the male-dominated fields of transportation, construction, and manufacturing. So we need very strong measures in these bills to ensure that women have the opportunity to work in these jobs and to get this they see this as an economic investment in people. But when they say people, right, they're often meaning men. Okay, when we say, we want to say people, women need this money too. And especially we can say it because of the pandemic. Women lost their jobs at greater percent. This is a she session. We need a she recovery, and it will only happen if the jobs that have been traditionally held by men and are the high wage, high skilled union jobs, women have a fair shot at them, women and people of color. So again, very similar to what Meg outlined in the infrastructure equity framework. So we have some of the same points. So I won't go over these extensively, except to say that we need strong compliance. And Lisa, thank you. You pointed out that we have good regulations. We don't have compliance on many of these things. And you're right that we have the anti-harassment language in the apprenticeship programs for mandating it, but it doesn't happen very much. So, and Kina just said, and she is our former chair at Chicago Women in Trades and has come back to our board. I'm so happy to have you back, Kina. and one of the leaders on our policy committee. And I want to give her credit for a lot of the language that's in the infrastructure equity framework, because it's her insights and knowledge. And she is assistant coordinator of the Carpenter's Apprenticeship Program. So when Keena says something, she knows it, and we should listen. She's one of the leaders I really look up to. So without goals, without investment in pre-apprenticeship training, without compliance and enforcement of those goals, we will not see women benefit from these jobs. And when the last bullet point here is that all of these things we're requiring need to flow down to all of the contractors and subcontractors. So our Chicago Transit Authority may get the award, but they're going to hire a developer, or they're going to hire a general contractor, and the general contractor is going to have subcontractors. In all of the bid documents, in all of the contracts, we want to see this same language so that everybody is working on a level playing field. Also, this has a domino effect, because the federal regulations for affirmative action on public projects says that it's not just on your public project that you have to meet these goals, it's on all work that you're doing while you are a federal contractor. So, and we have to have transparency about this. And Keena can tell you, we are trying to get that transparency from the city of Chicago on numbers, and it is impossible to get. Nobody is keeping track of the numbers of women and people of color working on city-funded projects. And we've gone to almost every single agency. Keena, I think we did get it from one agency, but there's a ton of them. So, so next slide. So this is another place where funding matters. And we used to say, put a lot of our energy into advocacy for want to. And the director at the Maine Department of Transportation, and this was about 30 years ago, said, why are you looking at want to? That's just a speck. The infrastructure and transportation money is huge. And there is a provision in there for 0.5% to be used for supportive services and on-the-job training. But it's a provision that says states may use it. And so guess what? Hardly any states ever used it. But when Maine used it, they were able to get numbers of women from 11, I think, to 14%. And on a Maine Department of Transportation bridge project in Portland, they had a childcare facility adjacent to the site, and they used Department of Transportation funding for that. So right now, I think the only state using this is Oregon, and they have some good achievements with that. But why just Oregon? You know, all of this needs to be replicated at a state level, state by state level. So that's why we say 0.5%. And let me just break down that number for you. 0.5%, if a state gets 10 million, that's 10 billion. That's 50 million for these supportive services. And again, that's not a whole lot. If you think about the program that Chicago Women in Trades runs, costs us about 1.5 million to run our direct service training program. And so I'm sure that's sort of consistent with tradeswomen's programs. We're just in Chicago. There's 12 other major metropolitan areas in Illinois that need that money. So when you're talking $50 million, it's really a speck. So this may sound like a lot of money, but it's not when it gets down to the state level. So I think that's all I want to say on all of these. I know I've said a lot.
No, that was perfect. Thank you, Lauren. Again, we will have some time at the end for questions, and we will, of course, be following up with information about the actual visits and which bills we'll be covering and talking points with a subsequent email. But that is a kind of overview of the 3 pieces of legislation that we'll be addressing, as well as the specific kind of talking points we're going to hit on in the meeting. So thank you, Lauren. Now we're going to turn to other ways to engage. So as I mentioned in the beginning, and for anyone who joined a little late, we've been talking about what the specific pieces of legislation that we will talk about in our lobby visits with legislators and staff that we'll be scheduling in July. And we do hope that many of you can join, because it is so critical to hear directly from tradeswomen. But we want to make sure that we talk about other ways to engage for those who might not be able to join a lobby visit or don't want to. So One kind of quick overview I just want to mention is that in addition to meeting with legislators and staff, which is what we'll be doing, letters and emails matter a lot. It can feel, I'm sure some of you are on, lists where you'll get a request to sign a petition or send an email directly to a legislator, and it kind of can feel like, does this matter? Are they caring? They do care, because their offices track how many communications they get on a given piece of legislation. So they will actually literally write down how many emails or calls or letters they got with regard to a specific bill or a specific provision in a bill, and they look at those numbers. They really like to hear from constituents, but they count everyone. So that can be a really effective way to do that. We're going to talk more about that. And we're also going to talk very briefly about ways to engage in the kind of media, which is through op-eds, and we have some opportunities for tradeswomen to engage via op-eds that we'll share kind of subsequent to this training. But just keep in mind that if you want to co-write an op-ed with one of us, we'd love to do that. And then we'll talk a little bit about ways that you can support the bills on social media. During the lobby visits themselves, you can support the retweeting or resharing on Facebook the pictures that we'll share, but also we're going to have some advocacy that you can participate in via Facebook or Twitter. And then finally, we're not going to get into this on this call, but we just want to note that there are ways to advocate within your union to try to get better equity and policies within the union. And that's not something we have time to go into detail about, but we want to just note that here, and we can do a future webinar on that. So I'm going to turn now to Cindy Frank, who is one of the co-chairs of the Action Committee. And Cindy's going to talk a little bit more about other ways of engaging that she and other tradeswomen she has in contact with have been engaging in on various pieces of legislation. So I'll turn it to you, Cindy.
Thank you, Jess. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Cindy Frank, 42-year union carpenter, 1 year retired. I'm a longtime advocate for the union and tradeswomen, and I was asked to speak on my experience as a legislative activist. In 2017, Missourians had the opportunity to collect signatures door-to-door knocking, parking lot soliciting, phone banking, rallies at the Capitol, and testifying at committee hearings, along with writing and personal conversations with our legislators, which is what we're meeting about today, for an initiative petition, which was Proposition A, the right to work. And many states are having this, it's coming up in many states. This particular proposition, tradespeople wanted it on the ballot because our legislative majority, which were Republican, wanted to try and push right to work. And instead of allowing the legislative majority to control working families' future, we wanted to have this petition on the general election. We needed to gather 1/3 of the six districts out of the 8 in Missouri registered voters to sign the petitions from the previous election, which was a lot of, I don't remember, I think it was 300,000 signatures we gathered. But anyway, long story short, our hard work paid off, both in getting the signatures so it was on the ballot, and then we passed it. But our legislative majority and our governor did not sign it into law. And so we were back at the Capitol once again, just a couple of weeks ago, because they're trying to lay over this bill and weaken our democracy. Every year, Missouri tradeswomen also use International Women's Day as a lobby day for women's issues at the Capitol. Usually an informative session is given next to rally, and then in small groups to various legislative offices to express our needs. Prepared practice statements are given to help articulate those certain needs. I'm sure most of you are familiar with apprenticeship and the problem we had with the ARAP last year in 19. And it was as easy as signing petitions shared on Facebook and emails to share with legislators that were directed right to the Department of Labor to ensure apprentices would apprenticeships would continue to continue working in an equitable way. This was a bill that was presented in committee and changed with hearing testimonies, letters, phone calls, and direct contact with legislators, so that trades apprenticeships would be excluded from the IRAP and continue as they were. Right now, we should all be encouraging our senators to pass Senate Bill 205, the Paycheck Fairness Act. Write the letters, ladies. There are many more ways to be a legislative activist, but know this: legislators are more nervous about when their constituents, show up than we are of them, because we know what side of the fence we're on.
Great. Thank you, Cindy. And I love these pictures. These are some of the pictures from the legislative advocacy that Cindy and other tradeswomen allies and advocates were engaged in legislative advocacy. So thanks so much for sharing those ways that you've been engaging, Cindy. And I wanted to just note, Cindy referenced the Paycheck Fairness Act, which is a piece of legislation that's also pending at the federal level that would strengthen our equal pay laws to ensure that employers pay women and men equally when they're performing equal or substantially equal work. And that is one of several bills, in addition to the ones we talked about today, that we as a task force are supporting and weighing in on. So, let me just remind everyone to mute if you're not talking. Thank you. So we'll let you know the list of all of the bills that we as a task force are supporting, in addition to the ones that we'll be specifically advocating on in these meetings, just so you're aware of all the legislation that we're supporting and ways that you can engage on that by sending letters, emails, calls, etc. So that was one of them. Great. I also now want to turn it to Kelly McClellan, who is another task force member who is also engaged in a lot of different forms of legislative advocacy, to just share a bit about the advocacy that she has been engaged in. So Kelly, I'll turn it to you.
I am Kelly McClellan, and 22-year member of the Operating Engineers in Kansas City. Apologize for any road noise. I just got off work from operating equipment, so I am in the field, rank and file member, and have been pretty active with the National Task Force since my first Tradeswomen Build Nation conference in 2016. When I started paying attention to my own career and all the careers coming up behind me and the women and my own union and the numbers of women or lack thereof, and realizing that obviously we all know that the men in our own unions don't care. It's the man's world. They do what they have to subside the number of women, but 3 to 4% isn't really going to cut it. So when I worked with the National Task Force, I've been sitting in on the policy committee phone calls for it's probably been about a year and a half. And when this infrastructure bill came up that we spoke about earlier, I realized that my Congresswoman, Sharice Davis, is on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and the vice chair, and offered to reach out to her as a constituent, because like they said before, they want to hear from us. They want to know that we are engaged. And I got a meeting with my Congresswoman in the National Task Force, Dewitt and Donna Linhoff, on the equity framework that the task force has put forth to get put into this infrastructure bill. And it is very important that we have those things, because, like I said, you can't get your union leaders to do anything. And if we can get this passed through policy, where it's forcing them and making them have to have accountability for the numbers of women in the trades, it's only going to help us locally to raise the numbers. So I strongly encourage all of you to, even listen in on that. Like just me, I'm just rank and file sitting there going, I really want to understand what's going on with the policies and how I can help there. And I've just been sitting there listening to what Jessica and Meg and Donna and Lauren and Connie and all of them have to talk about every every other month or whenever our policy calls are. And that's what gave me the idea that I could actually be involved and actually make a difference. And I think we are doing that as a collective. So the next, I guess, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say, but in those actions, I have been also asked to talk to the Democratic Women's Caucus about these same things that we're talking about right now. So
Great.
get
Thank
involved.
you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for sharing, Kelly. You know, as we've all heard, Kelly really was just instrumental in getting a meeting with the task force and her representative, who plays a key role, as you heard, on the committee that the infrastructure bill is in. So that was just a really critical piece of advocacy that got our foot in the door to talk to them, and having Kelly as a constituent and as a tradeswoman herself to share why this is so critical has just been huge. So thanks for sharing that, Kelly. So really quickly, we wanted to just note that Kelly mentioned the policy committee. So if anyone is interested in joining the policy committee, we have meetings every month. You can just reach out to Monica and me, and we'll add you to the list, or you can put your email in the chat and say you want to be added via the chat here, and we'll add you. I also now want to turn it over to Rudy Mulligan, who is one of the co-chairs of the Action Committee, to talk a bit about what the Action Committee is and how you can get involved if you want to.
Thanks, Jessica. So the Action Committee is a avenue of organizing grassroots tradeswomen all around issues that are important to women who are working in the field right now, who have you know, like a sense of what the working conditions are on the ground currently, what their unions are, you know, pushing them towards in terms of activism, and what they care about in terms of activism. And so we meet monthly to talk about the issues that are important to tradeswomen, and find out how to get support and resources for those issues, identify patterns and other patterns of, you know, problems or patterns of resources, so that we can kind of collectively address them, or, you know, bring it to the policy committee, or bring it to the communications committee or the research committee, and then vice versa, when policy and research and communications have, you know, national or regional items that we want to get pushed out to, you know, boots on the ground tradeswomen activists. This committee can be you know, a conduit for that. So we meet monthly to talk about what's going on. We're working on childcare. We're working on anti-discrimination training in the workplace. We set the agenda for the committee. So you know, if you show up to these meetings and you've got issues that you want addressed, you know, you set the agenda. Tradeswomen set the agenda for those meetings. So Cindy and I are co-facilitating it. We'd love to have more people get involved. So if you want to do that, give us drop your email in the chat here, let us know, and we'll get you on the mailing list for it as well.
Great. Thank you, Rudy.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can just let us know via the chat if you want to be added to either or both the policy and action committees. We already got some, so we'll send that out. And we'll also send a follow-up email to everyone who's participating with the information about how to join the task force if you're not yet a member, and how to join these committees if you want to be on the specific committee. So next, I'll just do one more reminder about mute if you're not talking. And then we're gonna next turn to, we're near the very end, we have these great photos. So as we've been discussing throughout, in these meetings, but also just in whatever legislative advocacy you might do, if you're gonna send a call, send an email or a letter or make a call to an office, having the personal story is what really matters the most. And so we wanted to just take this moment, we won't do it for long because we know time is limited, and then we're gonna turn to questions, but we wanted to just literally take 30 seconds, you could take more time later, to just think about your experience if you are a tradeswoman, woman, or a formerly working in the trades, or an ally or advocate, about a story that you personally experienced or someone you know experienced that might be relevant to some of the issues we've been talking about today. So that could be anything from just, I finally am able to pay my rent because I now have a job that pays a living wage. And I got that job because I was given the chance to be in a pre-apprenticeship or apprenticeship program, and now I have a job in the trade where I can make a better paycheck. Or, you know, unfortunately, we hear a lot at my organization, Equal Rights Advocates, from tradeswomen who have experienced discrimination or harassment on the work site, and really what it feels like to be the one of only one or two women on a work site. And even if it, you know, it might be sexual harassment or gender-based harassment, you know, unwelcoming comments that show the need for the training that we talked about. So why don't we just do that right now? We're just going to take a quick pause, 30 seconds, to just kind of think about that. And then, of course, there will be time in between now and the actual visit to think more about stories that you might be able to share. So we'll take that pause now. And thank you for the question, Anita. So right now, this is really just a time for everyone as participants to just think about their own stories. I know that you all work harder than anyone else I know in terms of both hours, but also like physical hard work. So it isn't always that we get some time to just reflect on this. So we just really just wanted to give you this short moment to kind of think about some of your own experiences and how what stories might be relevant to the bills that we're talking about. And again, this would be for you to share in a lobby visit or via a call or email to a legislator when we're urging them to act on these bills. So I want to just, before we turn to questions, open it up for about, you know, 2, maybe 3, yeah, literally blood, sweat, and tears. Thank you. 2, maybe 3 people. If you feel comfortable sharing that story, we would love to just open it up now to anyone who feels comfortable sharing their story. So I'm seeing if I see anyone, but you can also just unmute yourself if you'd like to share stories. Anita, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I'll share a big story. We live in the state of Rhode Island. There's a couple of sisters from there as well on this call. And we have a lot of fight that we have to do. There's never been a female in leadership in the history of any of the building trades here in Rhode Island. And we still have an all white male crew. The fight, we were able to have conversations with some progressive senators to discuss state TSA, tax stabilization agreement, workforce goals for women. But the General Assembly wouldn't even hear it, let alone pass it through the Senate to even be spoken up by the House. But it's they're pushing the building trades themselves are pushing apprenticeship goals 100%, but they're not really pushing female or minority goals. There's this kick to push MBE, WBE, WMBE, but every time I'm at the table, I keep trying to remind people that that does not affect the boots on the ground workers. That is not female or diversity workforce goals. MBE, WBE, as we all know, the companies can use their wives or their cousins or their daughter's name, and they're still hiring the same old white boys that they've always been hiring. It's still not going to be diversified. They're still not going to be hiring women. So we came to this point where we created Rhode Island Women in the Trades to start to organize women in the trades out here, so we have a stronger voice. But we've been being blacklisted since then. The building trade has been calling up legislators and people personally to say, hey, don't support Rhode Island Women in the Trades. So what do we do to fight that, to try to gain the support? We're trying to reach out nationally, internationally, but we need a lot of help out here in Rhode Island, ladies. I don't know if anybody's interested in helping out, but we need some help.
Thank you, Anita. I'm gonna, thank you for sharing. If people are interested in joining the efforts of Rhode Island Women in the Trades, you can reach out directly or through us and we can get them to you. Thanks, Anita. I'm gonna just, if we have time for one other person, if you want to share a story that you have thought about during the discussions about the bills that is relevant, please just let me know. If you want to raise your hand. I don't think I see it. Pam Hamilton, go ahead.
Hey, everybody. I just wanted to share that I was thinking that if it wasn't for funding to keep a program like CWIT active and bringing in people, that my 30 years of experience I wouldn't be able to pass that on to the new gals coming in. So I definitely value that there is that outlet for me to share my skills and my experiences and to recruit people. So yeah, definitely a supporter.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And then Lisa, I owe my life to Oregon tradeswomen. I was housing insecure in between jobs and going through terrible gender harassment at my job when she desperately searched for what can a woman do in the trades. The rest is history. So thank you so much for sharing that experience. So these are the types of stories that in these meetings, this is what matters to legislators and their staff, to hear from someone who participated in a program like this or benefited from a pre-apprenticeship or apprenticeship program or a job in the trades. We will be pointing out the stats of how few women are in these jobs, but we need these stories to really bring it home. So that's just a taste of the stories that we know are out there. So thank you for sharing those. And I'm sorry we don't have more time to share more stories because we want to make sure that we have time for any questions. So I want to just make sure, I don't think I see Gabrielle on, but I want to make sure I'm not missing you. Are you on, Gabrielle? Okay, so Gabrielle Gould, who's from the Democratic Women's Caucus, was going to try to join, but had multiple conflicting meetings, unfortunately. So she sends, we'll talk more about what the Democratic Caucus is in a subsequent call, but sends her welcome. And now we will take just the remaining 5 minutes for any questions that people have about the broader process of what we do in a lobby visit. If you have questions about the bills, understanding we only have 5 minutes, we'll have to keep it brief, but we will provide our email so that you can ask us any questions that you have after the training as well. So I'll just open it up if anyone wants to raise their hand with a question about anything we've talked about today. And if you don't know, if you don't know how to do the raised hand function, you can just like physically raise it in the camera and I will see it. I'm gonna stop the share. Okay, yes, Pam, that was from the old raised hand, I believe, correct? Okay, does anyone have any questions?
I do. I have a couple of questions.
Please go ahead.
I'd love, Rhode Island Women in the Trades is in the process of creating a 7-week female apprenticeship, kind of mimicking non-traditional employment for women. That's who I worked with Amanda kind of closely to build. So we created the 7-week syllabus for the curriculum. We just received our 501c3 a couple of months ago. We have the support of the chair of labor out here, who is actually a pretty good friend of mine now, very strong Black woman. But what would be the next steps and how do we gain partnerships outside of Rhode Island to be that much stronger because of what we're dealing with out here, first and foremost? So I'd like to see how I can get more information on all of that.
All right, thank you, Anita. So I think for that question, we're gonna follow up with you individually to make sure that we can, we only have 3 minutes. So I think we're gonna probably not get to any, but we wanna kind of just make sure if anyone has any questions about the bills that we talked about today or the lobby visits that we'll be engaged in, we'll do that. And then Anita, we'll follow up with you separately to kind of brainstorm some of the specific questions that you had. Yes, Melissa. And you'll just need to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you, Jessica. So I had a question for Lauren, because when she was describing one of the bills, the National Apprenticeship Act, Lauren, can you just tell us a little bit about how the old language was more strong? I sort of missed that part of why it's getting weaker now.
Yeah, so it's a good question, Melissa, and I sort of glossed over it. But for example, the old EEO language, equal employment opportunity language, had specific goals. And so that was huge. Not that they ever met them, but that they were required to set goals. So this current bill does not put that into place. And the updating of the regulations made it a little bit more complex even to set those goals. So that's one specific way. Connie, can you think of some more specifics? I haven't done a cross analysis more recently.
I'm sorry, I haven't really followed the details either. And I think what that brings up is that this is very complicated, but having the cheat sheets, having all the information down in front of you so you can look things up when you need to look them up is really important. And then having policy analysts that can help you go through the bills and pick out the important things is valuable too. And Jessica sent out a whole packet of material that has a lot of details that might answer that question.
And I think just
yeah, may I weigh in a little bit? This is Meg. Just a quick. I know we don't have much time, but what we're trying to do is make sure that the regulations that are strong are all included in the law, and some are not left behind. And that's kind of the difference, that what we have regulations now, not as strong as law, but if we don't put them all in the law, we may lose the package. So that's the high level concern in the new law.
And I would just encourage everybody, since we're mentioning these regulations, you can look them up. It's at the congressional, the CFR 29-30.30, and you will see what the obligations of apprenticeship programs are. And that would be a really good way to know what should be happening now and give you a foundation. It's also a good way for you to say, if you're meeting with a legislator, this is what they say now, and they don't do any of this. You know, we need to strengthen this.
Right. Okay, we are now at the end of the training. So I just wanted to follow up with a few final confirmations and reminders, which is one, this is recorded. So if you ever want to hear it again, the full hour and a half of fun, we'll have it available for you. We're going to send out the PowerPoint. We're going to send out the information we sent you before was a lot of background information. So again, it's helpful for context, but no need to memorize or know all of that. But we also, as I said, will be sending out follow-up information specifically on the bills that we'll be handling and covering, as well as the main talking points. So the next step is you'll get this follow-up information, and you'll also get a request from us to say whether you are interested in participating in lobby visits themselves, and if so, what your availability is. And we will work to set those visits up. And if you are interested in participating in them, we will get them in your schedule of availability, and you will then receive information about who your lobby team is, who the team lead is. We'll put you all on an email, and then you all will determine who's taking which talking points. So if you want to take on some of the more substantive talking points about the bills, you can, and we will give them to you. But you can also just choose to share a story, as we've talked about, or just be there. Sometimes people just listen. They're just there as a supporter in the lobby visits, and they don't speak other than introducing themselves. That's fine too. There's ways for everyone to engage. And finally, we will share how to support all of these important asks on social media. So before we close, I just want to remind everyone, we sent around to the task force listserv a sign-on letter, which I will resend again tomorrow morning. And that sign-on letter is specifically to urge certain equity requirements and provisions in the infrastructure bill. And we're specifically looking for individual tradeswomen to sign on, although we also want organizations. So if you as an individual tradeswoman are willing to sign on, or if an organization you're affiliated with is, please do sign on. There's a form to sign on. If you're not on the task force listserv, so you didn't get a sign-on invite for that, just throw your email in the chat now, and we will send you that letter so that you can sign on that way. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Connie to just close us out, and really want to thank everyone for being so engaged and present. And it's a real honor to get to work with all of you. So thank you. I'll turn it back to Connie.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica and Monica. You collectively did such a beautiful job in hosting this training. Lauren and Meg, thank you so much for all the information you shared and for how strong you are with advocacy. Thank you everybody for joining. Cindy and Kelly, your stories were awesome. And love the questions and thoughtfulness that people are working in their own communities to make a difference. And together we are going to change the situation for tradeswomen. And so I just want to thank you for joining us, and we'll keep moving on. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Lovely seeing you all.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Jessica.
Bye, everyone. I'm just making sure to write down all these emails.
Right.
Okay. Oh, and thank you, Alejandra Prado, I see. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, I think I've got all of the email. Oh, okay, great. Now it's just you two. Great, well, that was amazing. I thought that went really well. I'm
It went
gonna actually
really,
stop the
really
recording.
well.